All right, how's it going today, everyone? How you doing? So this is our State of the Bird address. The State of the Bird's kind of a pun on State of the State, State of the Union, blah blah blah. And it's been a while since we did our last one. Our last one was actually done in September of 2017. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But so today we're just going to go through where we've been since then, what's going on with the project, where we are, and what the future holds. So without any further ado, why don't we get into it? So, as I already started mentioning, the State of the Bird, it's a presentation to explain what's going on in the project, where we've been, what's going on, what's coming in the future, etc. And it's meant to be an interactive presentation for the community. So as you can see at the bottom of the window right now, there's a thing that popped up. If you have any questions about the project, the future, anything in general, or anything about the presentation, you can type in chat !ask, and then your question. And then after I'm done going through the presentation, I'll go through and answer those questions. So let's keep going here. Am I clipping it all? It looked like it got really loud there. Anyways, so retrospective. What's happened since the last State of the Bird? So our last State of the Bird was in 2017, like I said. Whoops. They were always meant to be quarterly. That is every 3 months. And I just kind of dropped the ball. We'll get into that a little bit more. But they will be going quarterly forward, or going forward, they will be quarterly. And our next one's tentatively scheduled for July 1st. They'll always be on Thursdays. The reason for that is on my stream here, we consider Thursdays Pigeon night because historically Pigeon has always released on a Thursday night. So Thursday has always been a very special day for the project. So doing things like, interact, like the State of the Bird address, that kind of stuff, all that's going to happen on Thursday because Thursdays are, important to the project. That was our release. We used to release every 2 or every 3 Thursdays. And the point is just that's an important day for the project. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're going with from there. So, all right. So, hosting, how it started since our last State of the Bird. In our last State of the Bird, we intended to stop self-hosting, but then everyone decided they didn't want to host us. This presentation will be made public after this stream. I forgot to get a link ready, but we'll get there. But so Bitbucket dropped Mercurial repositories. This was something I kind of knew was going to happen ahead of time, but it sucked nonetheless. In the last State of the Bird, we discussed moving so we used to self-host all of our Mercurial repositories at hg.pigeon.im, and the intent was like, okay, can I do ops work? Yes, but doing ops work cuts into development time. So the idea was if we stop doing ops development, or if you stop doing ops work, we can spend more time in development. But then Bitbucket dropped Mercurial support, Network Redux left the hosting business, Bintray also left the hosting business, and all of a sudden we had nowhere to host all our infrastructure. I will have a blog post coming out soon explaining our infrastructure and why all of it's here, but the sort of TLDR is Pigeon's not your typical open source project in 2021. And what I mean by that is a lot of open source projects now are just developer focused, right? So like putting them on something like GitHub makes sense because GitHub has a lot of developers, even GitLab or, whatever, right? But the problem is Pigeon's target audience is not developers. So if you take a non-technical user and say, yeah, report issues to GitHub, you're not going to get issues from end users because end users aren't going to be able to figure out, and I'm speaking generally here, but end users are less likely to be able to work through GitHub and do issues and stuff like that. So what we do instead is we have our own issue tracker, our own code review process, all of that to target our end users. We still have to add some more OAuth stuff so that we can actually get them. There's issues with getting Google and Facebook OAuth client IDs that I need to work out. I just need to get there. But that's one of the main reasons why we have all this infrastructure. So we were trying to get rid of that, like I said, because it's definitely a drain on development time. But everybody decided they weren't going to do it anymore. So Bitbucket dropped Mercurial repositories. Network Redux was hosting two VPSs for us that were running mailing lists, a bunch of websites, our XMPP server, and some other stuff I can't think of right now. And then for Bintray, there was some, I don't want to put this, shady stuff that's the former management at SourceForge was doing, which had turned a lot of people off of SourceForge. So what we ended up doing was we were still going to use SourceForge to do our releases or to host our files, but I wanted to add Bintray. So actually, the better story. Part of the Bitbucket stuff was we were also posting our file or our downloads there, our releases, so that people could have a source outside of SourceForge, because people have trust issues with SourceForge. Then after Bitbucket dropped Mercurial repositories, we moved them to Bintray, and then Bintray left the hosting business. So now everything is just back on SourceForge. So is what it is. All right. So anyways, how's it going? Where are we from now? Or where are we from where we are then to where we are now? So we applied for and got DigitalOcean credits for open source projects. What that means is, so like with Network Redux, we had applied for 2 virtual private servers. And they granted that, and we got 2 servers, and we just did whatever we wanted with those servers. The DigitalOcean open source credits, they basically just give you credits for DigitalOcean, and then you use them to pay for whatever you need. So what we've done is we've stood up a Kubernetes cluster on DigitalOcean to handle our infrastructure. We'll get more into that, but that's the main thing. So people are always going, why isn't Kubernetes kind of overkill for you guys? And, yes and no. The main thing is Kubernetes is self-healing, right? So like the Kubernetes clusters knows that it's supposed to have X amount of compute nodes in it, right? So if one of them dies for whatever reason, Kubernetes just stands up, or the DigitalOcean stuff stands up another node for it, and then everything just reschedules, and I don't get bothered. Everything just works, right? Likewise, if there's any problems in any of the nodes or anything, it just recycles, it heals itself, and it's fine. I don't have to do anything. So it's a little bit to buy in to get there, but once you're there, it's great. Like I haven't gotten a page on my phone for anything being down on infrastructure for months, except when I'm doing upgrades, which is cool. All right, so I had already mentioned that our email was running on Network Redux. So our email has temporarily been being hosted by Wigtail, which is very much thanks to Richard Lager. Richard Lager is a Pigeon developer. Wigtail is the company he works for. So we're still in the process of migrating it to a DigitalOcean droplet. We just kind of ran out of time by getting to it originally, but our current target for that is May 1st. The last target was March 1st, and then it was March 31st. I was like, I'm not going to get this done before the State of the Bird, so now it's next month. So we still have track running on our Steadfast Networks host. That's another virtual private server we have. Actually, it's a dedicated server. It's not virtual. But it's in read-only mode, and it will be moved to Kubernetes. I got most of the work done. I just haven't finished it, right? So like I've got everything so that I can run it in a container, so I can import the database, all that's done. I should actually have to finish deploying it and then update DNS. So our current target for that is May 1st. So that'll effectively mean if both of those get done, which are my next highest priorities outside of development stuff, that we will only have DigitalOcean as a hosting provider come May 1st. All right, everything else is already in our Kubernetes cluster. Our XMPP server, all of our websites, our issue tracker, our CI, all that's already running in our Kubernetes cluster. So with everything in Kubernetes, we can fairly easily migrate to another Kubernetes host if the need should arise. This whole situation with losing 3 hosting providers in the course of 2 years has been very eye-opening, to say the least. So one of the benefits of everything being in Kubernetes and just in Manifest, all I have to do is find another managed Kubernetes provider. Like I'm not trying to say that Linode or that DigitalOcean is going to drop us or anything like that. But in the event they do, we'll be able to easily move to another managed Kubernetes provider, even if it's Linode, OVH, Amazon, whatever, right? Because we already have all the manifest. So all we really need to do is grab our volumes out of there, back them up, stand up the new manifest, redeploy the volumes, and then fix DNS, which DNS is another thing we can deal with at a later time. But like, we won't have the problems we had with when we lost these hosting providers, right? Because so the Network Redux VPSs, for example, those we got originally in 2007. They're not really up to date because it's difficult to do that on a VPS, and people hadn't maintained them for a long time. But the bigger issue is in 2007 there wasn't really much of config management. I think Chef was technically around, but I don't think Ansible was around yet or anything. So the bigger problem is everything was hand configured. So when you just go to the servers, you have no idea what's going on. I spent a lot of time, I think back in 2016, figuring out everything that was running, where it's running, what it's handling, blah, 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 which is or one of the reasons why when Network Redux, when they decided to shut down, they gave us a month. I think maybe it was 2 months. They gave us 2 months to be like, we're shutting you down. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I've got almost everything moved, so that's good. That's good. Oh, and I meant to mention this at the beginning. We're not handling any alerts or anything right now because during the presentation. But yeah, I'm going to have to cut that from the VOD. But yeah. All right. Anyways, so that's kind of where the hosting's going right now. We're consolidating everything onto DigitalOcean. One provider, good or bad, I don't know. We'll see. Once we get our offsite backups done, it won't really matter because everything that's running in Kubernetes that's stateful, once we get that backed up, we'll be okay, and everything else is stateless. So it's not really a big deal. All right, so hosting our repositories. After the Bitbucket Mercurial sunset, we determined we wanted to stay with Mercurial. That was mostly because of me. As many of you know, I am not a fan of Git. I really don't like it, and I really do not like that everyone's like, oh, I don't know what your problem is, just use it. And that really gets on my nerves. Anyways, we're not going to get to that right now. But so we're going to stay with Mercurial, but there weren't any Mercurial hosts really around anymore. Heptapod was kind of becoming a thing, but Heptapod is GitLab with Mercurial, but it uses HDGit, and there's some weird caveats to it because of that. And all the other options kind of weren't working well or wouldn't work well for us, especially considering that we wanted to run them in containers. Or not in containers. We wanted to run it in Kubernetes, right? So I ended up writing a tool called HGKeeper, which is basically a bunch of glue wrapper or Golang wrapper code around HGServe. So that gives us a web interface that definitely needs some polish. I'm not a front-end developer. It's using Bootstrap, and it works. It's functional. It's not pretty. And it also handles the SSH server with all the permission based and all that stuff. I wrote HGKeeper. That's where all our repositories are now. Some of you may have seen it. It's running at keep.iamfreedom.org. You can go look at that website right now yourself and go from there. So as I said, could use some polish, but it works for now. For code review, we decided to leverage ReviewBoard. ReviewBoard is actually written by, him and one of his coworkers at the time. ReviewBoard was originally written by Christian Hammond, who was a former Pigeon developer. It was written by him and a coworker of his at the time to better handle the code review situation inside the company they were working for. Christian's still a good friend. I still talk to him fairly often, even not ReviewBoard related. So we decided to go with ReviewBoard because we have ties to it, and we've worked with Christian before. Obviously, he was a Pigeon developer, he's we don't there's not a personality problem or anything like that. So doing code contribution stuff like that, we understand each other, that kind of stuff. It's like, hey, if I want to add this feature, what's a good way to go about doing it? And he, gives us some pointers, and then we can send a pull request, and we work through the whole process just like anybody else does. So, so that can be found at reviews.iamfreedom.org. And that's how we're handling code review right now. So, all right, moving on. Next up, we've got our team tools. So the Mercurial sunsetting really left a bad taste in our mouth when it comes to Atlassian tools. So much so that we're even looking to get, I stopped using Trello for personal reasons because Atlassian bought Trello. I am just done with Atlassian kind of things. But anyways, so our plan was that we were going to move to Bamboo. We already had a bunch of stuff in Bamboo, which is an Atlassian product. And we were going to move to Confluence to replace the TrackWiki articles, and we're going to move to Jira for issue tracking. Then all this Bitbucket stuff happened, and I was like, I'm not doing anything with Atlassian ever again. So much so that our translation tool right now, we're using Transifex. That is somehow an Atlassian product. I'm not exactly sure, but Atlassian's logo is showed predominantly on the page. So we're going to be replacing that in the near future too. You've been looking for a Trello replacement as well? Yeah, it's yeah, and I've got to stay on the presentation. But yeah, so after some digging, we discovered that JetBrains, the one that everybody knows for making editors, whether that's I can't remember the Java one. I want to say it's not Idea, whatever. But you know, they make PyCharm. They've got Android Studio and a bunch of other editors, right? But we found out that they have team tools, and more importantly, they have really good team tools. So they have a centralized auth component named Hub. They have a continuous integration product named TeamCity. I've known a TeamCity for a long time, but I never knew that it was actually JetBrains. But then they also have an issue tracker called UTrack. So one of the very cool things about JetBrains is, even though they're a proprietary company and they're for profit, which is fine. Like I don't have a problem with that. Like, I think everything, like, I am a free software advocate, but you know, sometimes you've got to compensate, right? Or not compensate. Whatever. Sometimes you got to make the hard decisions. Let's go with that. But one of the cool things is all of their tools come with the ability. All their team tools are free for very small teams. So like Hub, their centralized auth, that's actually free for any number of users for anybody. Anybody can just go grab it and use it. Their CI gives you 3 build agents and 100 build configurations for free. And the issue track and UTrack gives you up to 10 users. I don't think it's tied to a number of projects or anything, but you can get 10 users for it for free. Like, you don't even have to talk to them. You can just go download it, install it, and voila, it'll work. It'll do its thing. However, as I mentioned, those license restraints a little bit, we kind of exceed those, right? So like, for UTrack, we want us being a public open source project that has whose end users are just, you know, everyday normal people. We need the ability to have more than 10 users being able to report issues. So for UTrack and then also for TeamCity, we want to build on lots and lots of platforms. And we have many build agents: Windows, Mac, Linux, BSD. Even those 4 alone, we're already past the limit, right? So we applied for open source licenses for TeamCity and UTrack. I don't know why I left Hub in there. That shouldn't be in there, but whatever. So they granted them to us, so we have basically full unlimited access. So that means that anybody in the world can create an account in our Hub instance and then report an issue on UTrack. We actually don't have TeamCity open to the public because I haven't had the time or really need to figure out how to secure it for public consumption yet. But you can find Hub at hub.iamfreedom.org. Again, that's just a centralized auth. So like when you log in, like you'll get a dashboard of like issues that like you're either following or you've created and stuff like that. It's more useful for an administrator like me who's like, oh, okay, I need to add this user to this group and that kind of stuff. But yeah, and then the issue tracker is at issues.iamfreedom.org. UTrack is very nice. It's kind of like Jira if Jira wasn't slow and had some features you really enjoy. IntelliJ, that's what it was. Thank you. All right, so that about covers it for team tools. All right, so hosting XMPP. So one second here. So one of the things we've tried to do since we ever started self-hosting ourselves in 2007 was we wanted to have a presence on XMPP. XMPP, for those who don't know, stands for Extended Message and Presence Protocol. I think that's right. It's been a while since I've had to think of it. And what it is it's a federated chat network that is open source and open specification. It used to go by the name Jabber until a number of years ago. I don't remember exactly how far. Cisco actually bought the Jabber name. So you'll see like Cisco Jabber products. That's actually built on top of XMPP. XMPP is the official open source, open standard now, but people will still recognize it with the Jabber name. So anyways, we replaced our eJabber instance with a Porosity instance. That's now running in Kubernetes, which authenticates against our Hub instance at hub.iamfreedom.org. One of the reasons we replaced eJabber with Porosity was we never really like got to know how to configure eJabber, or we never really knew the developers of it, right? So like eJeopardy and Porosity are both open source, but one of the cool things about Porosity is a bunch of their developers also hang out in our XMPP conference. So, you know, we've built a, I don't want to say community bond, but, you know, we've worked together with stuff before. So by us moving to Porosity, it helps us strengthen that bond of, okay, they do the server side and we do a client side kind of thing. They're not, we'll promote them. We don't expect them to promote us, especially not right now, because Pigeon 2 is not a state-of-the-art XMPP client by any means, which we totally understand, and that's fine. But, you know, that gives us something to work towards. So, anyways, one of the cool things about moving to Porosity was, since the config's a lot easier to understand, I also added it. So we have the pigeon.im as an XMPP domain. And then we also added an IamFreedom.org virtual host for the IamFreedom board. IamFreedom, for those of you that don't know, IamFreedom is a nonprofit corporation that is works as a legal umbrella for both Pigeon and Adium right now. And we're open to talking to other open source chat clients, protocols, whatever you want to call it, to become a legal entity for them. One of the reasons for that is we had some legal issues in the past, and instead of people suing developers directly, now they have a legal entity in the IamFreedom board that they can sue. So that, or not the board, but in the nonprofit that they can sue, right? That way it's a little less scary for everyone involved. We can talk more on that. If you have questions, go ahead and type ask exclamation point ask in chat with your question, and then we'll cover questions at the end. Right now they'll just queue up. So by all means, feel free to go ahead and ask questions whenever. So we also recently launched a pigeonchat.com virtual host for community members to access our XMPP resources, but we don't open it to the rest of the XMPP federated universe. This was kind of a hard decision. So being the developer of a chat client, one of the things is you need to have a network for people to reach and access, right? But the problem is, if you look at xmpp.net and look at the server list, you see, like, you just kind of pick a server at random and go from there. And that kind of sucks, especially if you just want to talk to us on XMPP. On the other side of that coin, again, as I said before, I don't want to put a whole lot of time into ops. I want to make a big difference with what I can, which means I don't want to have to worry about somebody doing explicit things in a chat room for something we host, which is then going to have law enforcement asking me questions, right? So one of the reasons we launched Pigeon Chat as non-federated is so that anybody who has an account at hub.iamfreedom.org they will automatically be able to access pigeonchat.com. They can join any of the Pigeon or the conference.pigeon.im multi-user chat rooms, as well as the IamFreedom ones. We have a list of them on our website. We need to make it a little bit more prominent, but that's the idea. So if you haven't heard about it before, that's the idea. There's a link on the website that will tell you how to walk you through how to set it up in Pigeon 2, and you'll be good to go. In the near future, we'll also be adding an announcements channel that most of you will probably ignore, which is totally fine. But it'll be your typical announcements channel that'll show ticket updates, ticket/issue updates, new commits, new code reviews, that kind of stuff, right? Infrastructure issues. The point is, like, if you want to see anything that's going on at any point in time, it'll be shown in that channel. There's a couple reasons why that hasn't been done yet. The main one is the plugin for Porosity that does it expects you to put it in the config file. And one of the things we're doing with our Kubernetes cluster is all of the manifests that deploy everything in the cluster, well, just about everything in the cluster, is completely open to the public. And the way the webhook URLs work that makes the stuff like the announcements channel work is the current plugin expects it to be in the config file, but our config file is public. So that's not going to work, because that's a writable, open to the public thing. The webhooks work by security through obscurity. You have to know the magic URL to be able to send the packet that'll show up in the chat. So, like, I can't put that in a config file, because then it's not obscured anymore, and then you can't find it. So what ends up happening is, you end up with like a big random string in the middle of the URL, and chances of people guessing that is low. And if they do, you just generate a new one, and then you update your stuff, right? Yeah, we need to update the plugin so we can configure that via commands, and then it doesn't need to be in the config, and then we'll be good to go. So, all right, moving on. Let's talk about Pigeon 2. So, since the last State of the Bird, which was September of 2017, which, oh my gosh, that's a long time ago. We released 2.13.0 on March 8th of 2018. We followed that up with 2.14.0 on October 6th of 2020, with a patch release of 2.14.1 on November 6th of 2020. I didn't want to get too much into the changelog here. The changelog's there. It's public. These have all been out for a while, so I didn't really think it was a big deal to mention them. But one of the big things to note is with 2.14.0, we split libgnt out into its own repository. If you're like, what the heck is libgnt? You're not alone. That's one of the reasons why we split it out. So libgnt is a toolkit that's been developed to, I don't want to say clone, but we'll say mimic the GTK API. But the main difference is that instead of drawing to a graphical user environment, it uses ncurses. So libgnt is the, it's the toolkit that makes Finch possible. So if you're not aware of Finch, which is another project that's actually in our code base, Finch is an ncurses based libpurple user interface, which means anything you can do in Pigeon, well, almost anything you can do in Pigeon, you can do via terminal using Finch. I say almost anything because obviously you're in a terminal, you can't share pictures, you might not have audio, you're definitely not going to do video, stuff like that. But chatting, joining chats, IM, sending files, all that should work just fine in Finch. But then one of the other big things with 2.14.0 was we announced our intention to no longer do any feature development for 2.14 or for the 2.x series at all. What that means is we will not be releasing 2.15.0. For those of you that don't know our versioning stuff, our versioning schema, the major version number means there's been API or ABI breakage. That means like something compiled against Pigeon 2 will not work against Pigeon 3. That's just expected. That's explicit in the version number. When the minor version number changes, it means we added additional API. So we haven't changed any API or any API signatures. We haven't changed changed anything. We haven't removed anything, but we've added new API. And then the .y or the micro, that just means we patch stuff, right? So there's been no API changes, it's just bug fixes, right? So what it means is, since we're no longer doing minors, Pigeon 2.14.0 or Pigeon 2.14 will be the last ever minor release of Pigeon. We're still going to be doing patch releases, but all future development going forward is going to 3.0.0. And I know that's not what a lot of people like to hear. But the thing is, right now there is 2 people actively working on Pigeon, and one of them's part-time and the other one's me. If we're ever going to get Pigeon 3 out the door, like the Pigeon 3.0.0 final release, is we have to make concessions, right? We've got to make some sort of change so that we can make that happen, and that's key to this. So, all right. So, with that in mind, today we're releasing Pigeon 2.14.2. And in fact, it's already released. I literally finished uploading it after I had hit the start stream button. So if you check SourceForge and if you check the website should have it right now, actually. So Kubernetes updated it. The website now shows that 2.14.2 is live. I should have double-checked the download link. And the download link is working. Yes. That includes the Windows build. The Windows build is there. It is live. It is signed by brand new code signing cert. Yay! We're kind of down to the wire in getting that working, but all that's good. All that's ready to go. So what's new in 2.14.2? In 2.14.0, there was a regression where if you pasted some HTML that had a P element in it, it would add additional white space at the start of the message. I think it was also the end, but at least the start. That's been fixed. We should have done a patch release to fix it a long time ago, but it just got lost in the madness of stuff, right? We updated the dbus binding generation to require Python 3, because Python 2 is, no longer supported. We fixed a crash where if you pasted elements like horizontal roles, it would eventually lead to a crash. And what I mean by eventually is, this is a bug that is probably older than some people in this stream right now. So we weren't properly deleting it from the input. So we left pointers around that were pointing to invalid memory. So you wouldn't necessarily crash when you sent the message. This is one of the reasons that made it hard to find. But what would happen is you would paste the message as an HR or something else. It's some or other similar HTML elements, and then when you send the message, that when the text would get deleted from the input box, that would then cause the dangling pointers to be there, which the program would still run because it wasn't trying to access them yet. But next time it tries to access them, you would crash. That bug goes back to code that was introduced in 2003. That sucks, but this is one of the things when like I want to try to explain stuff to people about Pigeon is like when we talk about like legacy code, we're talking very, very old code. For example, there's a bug I'm trying to fix, or there's some code I ran across that I'm looking at in Pigeon 3 right now. That goes back to 2001, and there's no reason why it was there. There's no comment left. I can't figure out why it's there, and I'm just like, I guess I'll delete it, right, and see what happens. But we'll see what happens. There's a few more things. The changelog is available on the website. You can find all of that there. All right, so Pigeon 3, the thing I hope everyone's interested in. So what's going on in Pigeon 3? Well, status. We are absolutely nowhere where we hoped to be by now. Some of you may have heard me say that when I first took over the project in 2016 that I was like, oh yeah, no problem, Month 3.0 released by the end of the year. Thinking a full year of development, I'd be able to get it done. Whoa, boy, was I wrong. So a big part of that is the tech debt is orders of magnitude worse than I thought it was. For example, that bug we just fixed in Pigeon 2, I mean, it's an 18-year-old bug. What are you going to do, right? You're not going to find it until you go looking for it, and finding that stuff is difficult. So aside from that, the hosting problems ate a lot of development time, and by a lot, I mean a lot. I can't even, I don't even know how much because I didn't keep track. I just know that it was a lot. But on the bright side, we're slowly making progress. We're not where we wanted to be, but we are moving forward. So, our setbacks, right? There's been a number of things that have significantly slowed us down. One of the biggest ones was that WebKit 1 got deprecated. So, there was a summer code project in 2009 that moved our conversation windows to use WebKit. And one of the main reasons for that was to support ADM themes. And I know because I've seen a certain video out there that was actually on the Pigeon subreddit that some people really want the ADM themes. And unfortunately, I've got bad news for you. So we couldn't port to WebKit 2 because there's no Windows port of WebKit 2. Apple was maintaining that with Safari, and Apple dropped Safari for Windows. So there's no Windows port of WebKit 2. And you're probably going, well, what about Chromium? So Chromium, a while ago, they forked WebKit into Blink. And the problem with Blink is even a stripped DLL is like 67 megs. So when you consider that the whole Pigeon installer on Windows is like 8 megs plus like 20 megs for GTK, Pigeon 3 is going to be bigger. But like, okay, so you're going from like 30 megs to at least 67 megs for a minimal install of that, right? And that's just like, okay, that's a non-starter. Like we're just not going to do that because we're not going to make a ginormous download for people. And on top of that, one of the issues with using a web rendering engine in a chat client is WebKit, Blink, all of them, they constantly have security issues. And I'm not saying that Pigeon's a saint by any means, right? But opening the door to that many security issues for chat themes doesn't seem like a wise decision to me. And what I mean by that is like, all right, so Nintendo Wii, I think, was hacked via WebKit. The Wii U was hacked via WebKit. The Switch has been hacked via WebKit. So is the PS3, the PS4, I think PS Vita. Xbox One, Xbox 360, like all of these things have been hacked via WebKit. So, like, taking that on just doesn't seem like a great idea. So anyways, aside from that, the whole WebKit situation lasted many months, and it made it impossible to build Pigeon 3 if you didn't already have WebKit 1 installed. A while back, I had built a new desktop machine to compile Pigeon faster. So like I was actually compiling WebKit for other developers just to keep them running. So like I'd build WebKit in a container to give them a package to install in their machine, because I could do it faster than them, because it would take them 14 hours to build. That's not a good situation. So that had to change. So that led to the development of Talkatoo. We'll talk a little bit more Talkatoo in a minute, but Talkatoo is our new conversation widgets. It's not going to support ADM themes. We might have some sort of themes, but we're not looking at that yet. So, though, when we talk about how much development time we lost, I said we'd lost at least 6 months of development time to the Bitbucket sunsetting. Reconiro thinks it's more like 9. I don't know, honestly. I know that I, through my Whisper networks, found out about a year ahead of time that Mercurial was definitely being sunset at Bitbucket. So I had started looking at situations then. So this didn't kill all development, but I mean, I had to write an entirely new program, network-based program that has to handle multiple users and stuff like that and make that work. So I said at least 6 months of development time was probably lost over that year, because I was probably at least half my time working on HDKeeper and other infrastructure stuff at that time, which is huge, right? That's absolutely huge. That's a ton of time spent, a ton of time that could have been working on Pigeon 3 that wasn't, because hosting issues. So then, aside from that, the amount of deprecated API that we're using is, as I say in the slide, staggering. I think it was about a year ago or so. I had ran the build in GNOME Develop, and GNOME Develop, one of the cool features about it, I'm not using it yet because of other issues. I'm not using it as my daily driver because of other issues. But one of the cool things is it keeps track of all your warnings, and it'll actually count them. So like instead of me going through and counting the compile output, it'll just tell me. And even though the build was successful, we were at like 650 warnings. And these, some of them, but definitely the very, very few of them were, actual like code related ones were like, oh, hey, you're dropping the const part of this pointer because you're pointing into a non-const pointer, that kind of stuff. There was a few of those. But the vast majority of them, probably at least 600 of them, are deprecation warnings. So what is a deprecation warning, right? So we talked about earlier about how our version numbers work, where the minor version means new API is there, and a major version means the old API was changed or removed. So what happens is when a library like GTK or glib, or even libpurple, decide that this function should no longer be used, it gets marked for deprecation, which means at the next major version, that function or that API, that function will be removed. So one of the problems is we are still using a ton of deprecated API. So if we want to move to GTK4 at some point in the future, we absolutely have to get rid of that deprecated API because it doesn't exist in GTK4. We're not looking at moving to GTK4 right now. We're just trying to get a clean build and get everything working and going. But that's one of the key factors we have to deal with, right? So we've gotten through, I think we're down to like 200 of them, but there's big issues for that, which we'll get into in the moment. That's holding that up. So all right, next up we got Talkatoo. So Talkatoo started as a clone of our GTK IMHTML widget. For those of you that don't know, GTK IMHTML has been the input and history widget, or the message input and the history widget that's been used since, oh boy, no, I'll say probably at least game 0.6.0, but if not before that. So it's had a lot of time to organically grow. So one of the things we did with Talkatoo was like, all right, we got to go back to something similar to this, but we're not using this code for a number of reasons. So we rewrote it from scratch. We made sure it was modular. One of the issues with GTK IMHTML, the way it stood, was the code was not modular. It was one giant monolith, and it was not, and it's based on a GTK text view. A GTK text view is also supposed to use a GTK text buffer with the GTK text table and all this other stuff none of you care about. But the problem was with GTK IMHTML, that was all built into one thing. So it wasn't modular. It was a ginormous monolith, and doing anything with it was very painful. Like that bug I mentioned earlier that was fixed in 2.14.2, it's related to GTK IMHTML and the complexity that's involved in that. So by making it modular, it's easier to understand because you don't have all these different pieces mashed together. You've got clear boundaries and encapsulation, so you know what's supposed to go where, and you can actually handle it. So one of the cool things is, as you can guess from the name, GTK IMHTML only supports HTML, plain text and HTML, and XHTML actually. One of the things about Talkatoo is it supports HTML and Markdown right now. So like you can input HTML and Markdown, it'll render them, it'll work fine. Actually, rendering is a little broken right now. We got to fix that. But one of the other cool things is, since everything's so modular, it's not difficult to add additional markup formats, right? So like there's a couple IM protocols out there that use like BB code and other stuff like that. So like because Talkatoo is modular, we can easily add support for that so that we can better support those protocols. Aside from that, one of the big differences we made recently in Talkatoo is we created separate widgets for the chat, for the conversation history and message entry. In Pigeon 2 and Game before it, that was the exact same widget, which led to a lot of confusion and things, special cases, stuff like that. We've completely split those apart now. They're completely different widgets now. We had to make a sacrifice for the way that we're doing the chat history, and that's that you'll no longer be able to copy and paste text directly. Because we moved to a GTK list box, which doesn't allow that. But moving to the GTK list box lets us do a whole lot of very cool things. I'm not going to get into those now, but it'll let us do a whole lot of very cool things that'll that we want and need to do in the future. Whereas if we were going to stay on a GTK text view, it's very painful to do, which is where I ended up going. I was like, all right, we're just done with this. Like, there's no way I can make this work without having ridiculous hacks in the code, so we're just moving to Listbox. So that's kind of in flux right now, but we're making progress. It's doing all right. It's going there. So Talkatoo actually started as a separate repository. One of the reasons for that was I didn't want to use any of the existing Pigeon code. And one of the reasons for that is like the GTK IMHTML stuff, it has its own custom HTML parser, for example. It's not regex based. So, you know, we've got that going for us. But like, there's libraries that do this way better than us. And like, that's all they do. Why are we trying to do this? Like, I understand why we're trying to do this. And the reason for that is, you know, back in the day, being, you know, we'll even say 2007 or earlier. I mean, 2007, everybody was pushing XHTML because on low-powered mobile devices, you need XHTML because you need the code to be valid because it's low-powered mobile devices. Now, I mean, I have a supercomputer in my pocket in 2007 terms, right? So since then, HTML5, that kind of stuff, there's a parser out there called Gumbo that's actually released by Google, and that's what we're using in Talkatoo to parse HTML. Likewise, we're using CommonMark to parse Markdown because we shouldn't be doing parsers. We should be taking it and then rendering it in our UI, right? And that's the entire point of it. But stuff like that gets difficult, and doing that stuff is hard. So one of the reasons we made it as a separate repository was we were thinking that other GTK-based IM clients might want to use the widget because we're doing the heavy lifting here, and we're making it so that they can use it. So that's why it's its own widget or its own repository. Other clients like Gajim, Dino, and I always forget the third one. But yeah, there's a third one I can't think of. Empathy. So like instead of all of us doing all this hard work of like making themable stuff and, you know, handling like read receipts, delivery receipts, reactions, all that stuff, why should all four of these projects do that when we could work collaboratively on one thing that just makes it work? Unfortunately, there's been a very big problem brewing in Talkatoo. And that is, how do we handle emoji? And when I say emoji, I don't just mean the Unicode standard. If it was just the Unicode standard, that'd be fine. That'd be fine. But this talk is being done live on Twitch right now. Twitch has custom emojis. Twitch has a lot of custom emojis. Pidgin is a multi-protocol client. It supports multiple protocols like Slack. Slack allows you to have thousands of custom emojis per Slack instance. Discord, which there's a Discord plugin for Purple too, also supports thousands of emojis. So the problem becomes, how do you create and manage a database of emojis and present them to the user in a sense and make it work? And the problem we have right now is Talkatoo started as just a thing for Pidgin. We should talk about this a little bit real quick too. Yeah, emojis, emoticons, smileys, whatever you want to call them. So if you have questions, please type !ask, then your question, and we'll get to questions at the end of the presentation. So one of the issues with that is Talkatoo was built to just be something that would plug into a UI. And we should touch base on this a little bit more to go forward. I plan on getting something put together in the future to explain this better, but Pidgin is just a user interface. Pidgin itself doesn't know anything about the instant message networks. That all comes to protocol plugins that come from libpurple. So what is libpurple? Libpurple is it's a library that abstracts instant messaging networks and a user interface, and it becomes the glue code between all of it. So as I mentioned earlier, in the Pidgin project, we actually released two IM clients. We released Pidgin and Finch. And both of them are just UIs built on top of libpurple, and all the protocol plugins go to libpurple. So one of the problems with Talkatoo when it comes to the emoji or emotes is, for Talkatoo to be able to have a database of them and to look them up and everything, it needs to know about all of the emojis, emotes, whatever you want to call them. But Pidgin needs to ask libpurple for those. So we need to have, so either Talkatoo has to grow a UI or a non-GTK specific API with a separate library so that we can use it in libpurple, or we need to merge it all in. And we haven't taken the plunge either way yet, because I still think there's hope to have a shared set of chat widgets. But this has been a huge problem, because our current thoughts for handling emojis are that it'll be backed by a SQLite database that uses not prefix tree, but whatever. We'll do fuzzy matching, and all of the emotes will have labels on them so that we can tell which ones belong to which protocols and which chats and stuff like that. Because you run into fun issues with like Twitch. So like Twitch may be able, like you can view any emote on Twitch, but you can only send certain emotes on Twitch. So like we need to be able to show all of them, but like when we pop up a dialogue for you to input a widget or an emoji, we either have to show that it's locked for you or not show it, right? Likewise for Discord and all this other stuff. So that's been one of the really big problems that we've been trying to solve, and it may lead to Talkatoo just becoming part of Pidgin and not being its own standalone thing. But we'll see where that goes. Trigram. There we go. Thank you. A trigram, it's a development term, which means basically we take 3 characters and store them as pointers. So like if you take like emote, like, I don't know, we'll say like Kappa on Twitch, right? So your trigrams would be KAP, APA, or APP, PPA. That would be your trigrams. And that way, like when somebody's typing it, you can start searching for those trees and then jump through and find the right one. And that's basically how it works. Yeah. So, all right. So that's Talkatoo in a nutshell. Wow, we're going way longer than I hoped to do. We're getting near the end. Don't worry. All right, so what actually is done in Pidgin 3? So one of the things we decided early was that we wanted to move the entire user interface to Glade. Glade is a rapid application development tool, a RAD tool, which is just a fancy way of saying it's a UI builder. It's kind of drag and drop, put your components on a form, name them, set up properties, that kind of stuff. That's what Glade is. The main stuff that's not done for it is the contact list, aka the buddy list window, which we will be renaming because in 2021 people don't understand what you mean by a buddy list. And then the conversation window. Those two haven't been migrated because those two are both under... They're both going to be going under heavy changes. But one of the reasons we want to go to Glade is historically, up until this point, all of Pidgin's user interface has been written via C code. And that's great because you can write, little helper functions that'll make things consistent and so on and so forth. But the problem is if you want to bring a UI or a UX person in, a designer, something like that, finding a good UX person that knows C code and understands GTK, good luck. So Glade's not much better, but it's better, right? Somebody's more likely to figure out how to use Glade than they are going to be going through your API and figuring out your custom functions to build widgets and stuff like that. So the intent is very much so, once we get everything moved in, we're going to bring in a UX person. I don't know who, I don't know how that's going to work yet, but we're going to figure something out. Because let's be honest, and even Pidgin 3 right now looks a lot like Pidgin 2. And that looks like AIM from the 90s. And I know, I know people really like retro stuff, but yeah, we can and we should be doing better. So the big push for Glade for that is on top of all of that as well. It also makes it easier for us to actually build the interface in the C code. Because all of that noise of all the custom properties and all that stuff, that all gets moved out to a separate Glade file. And then the code is literally just, how does this thing work? Instead of like, let's set the alignment on this label to left adjusted and top, right? That we don't have to do any of that in code anymore. That's all handled in the Glade file. So this is like a pure example of separating style or design from code, right? Like actually making that distinction. And that's absolutely huge. So aside from that, geobjectification is very nearly complete. So what is geobjectification? So back in about 2006, 2007 or so, I started going on this campaign of saying libpurple and Pidgin, all of it really, should really be using GObjects. GObjects are an approximation of polymorphism in C that comes out of the glib library. We're already 100% fully dependent on glib. Why don't we go further and use GObjects? Because then we get fun stuff like reference counting, which we don't have in Pidgin 2. The fact that we don't crash as often as I think we should is amazing. The memory management in Pidgin 2 is not good. Like it works, but yeah. So getting reference counting, that fixes a lot of that issues. But on top of that, geobjectification gives us a lot of powerful stuff that even back in 2007, I didn't realize was a thing. Since then, there's been a tool called Geobject Introspection that's been released by the GNOME team. And one of the very cool things about Geobject Introspection is it lets you dynamically create language bindings. So to put that in non-technical terms, we release a library that's written in the C programming language. If you want to interact with it, you have to somehow you have to be able to digest that C API. So like if you're using C++, that's fine. But if you want to, like, I don't know, build something based on libpurple or a plugin in Pidgin on Python, you need something that will convert all that C API into Python code that you can call. In the past, people have done this. They've sat there and manually built it, and it works. There's other tools out there that can do it. I can't think of what the one's called. But they're error prone, they have issues, that kind of stuff. What Geobject Introspection does is it uses our documentation comments that becomes our API reference. It uses all that with some additional annotations to generate files so that people can dynamically create the language bindings. What that really means is creating the language binding, you create a Geobject Introspection language binding for a language, and then you're done. Like most end users don't even have to do it. So as part of the Pidgin project, we released Geobject Introspection type libraries for libpurple, Pidgin, Finch, etc. And then that just means like if you're in Python, you depend on Python GObject, and then you say import libpurple, and you just use it. We didn't have to write any Python bindings. You didn't have to write any Python bindings. Only the person that did the abstract layer of how to handle GObject introspection type libraries had to do the work, and everybody else benefits, and that's amazing. And that's where one of the very cool things is that with Pigeon 3 being based on gplugin, which is a library I wrote many years ago now, which uses GObject introspection, it means that we now have support for native plugins in C, C++. We also use the GObject introspection to create a Vala API file, so you can write stuff in Vala and Genie. There's GObject introspection libraries for Lua, so we now have a Lua plugin loader, as well as Python. And I did this mostly for completeness with Pigeon 2, but we also have a Perl plugin loader that uses GObject introspection. And the benefit there is we just supply a typelib file, and gplugin has to know how to actually load the files and that kind of stuff. But then it just works. And in theory, we can do that for any language, which means you can write a Pigeon plugin in whatever language you want once we get a GObject-based, or once the GObject introspection works for it, and there's a loader for it in gplugin. Or if you just want to talk to libpurple from, say, Node, you can use Node.gir to talk to libpurple from Node, and you don't have to write any language bindings. It'll just work. Likewise, you can do the same thing with Go. There's a Go one as well. I can't think of what it's called. Or even Rust, right? Everyone's on a big old Rust kick right now, right? You can take GTK Rust, point it at the purple typelib file, the Purple 3 GObject introspection typelib file, and you can just start developing a program against libpurple in Rust. You're done. That's it. And that's absolutely amazing. So that's one of the big benefits we're getting out of moving to GObjects. So, all right. I'm going super winded, sorry. So aside from that, we've also improved the password manager work from a 2008 Google Summer of Code project. The improvement here was there were some design decisions that left some issues with the API. That basically we just overhauled, cleaned up, and made things much happier. So right now in the Pigeon 3 code base, this has been a gripe from security people for a very long time. We've had a very clear stance on it for a very long time, but Pigeon 3 will no longer support clear text passwords at all. So our defense before was like, well, if you just have an encrypted database store, then you're just putting a password behind a password. Well, I don't know. For about 10 years, people have been fine with that. It's called a password manager. 1Pass, LastPass, Bitwarden, etc., right? Everybody puts their passwords behind the passwords now. In fact, that's the recommended way to do it. That and then have two-factor authentication. So in Pigeon 3 now, we will be adding an internal keyring. I need to finish that part. We haven't done it yet. But right now, we have support for the Dbus secret service, which is what is the way you store passwords in GNOME right now, and other desktop environments, maybe XFCE, that kind of stuff. We also have support for KWallet. So if you're on KDE, we integrate completely fine with KWallet now. We also integrate with the Windows Credential Store, or the Windows Credential API. So even on Windows, your passwords will be stored securely behind your Windows Credential stuff. We don't have Mac keychain access yet, but we'll get to that at some point. But that's a very cool thing. There's a few bugs to be worked out there, but it's working good. So as mentioned before, we also replaced GTK IMHTML with Talkatoo. We have the initial work in place to do message attachments. So you're probably going, well, what do you mean by a message attachment? And by a message attachment, I mean, so if you've ever been in like a Slack room and like somebody wants to share a file, they just, like paste it or hit upload or insert file or something like that, and then it shows up as part of the chat message, right? So it's like their chat message, and there's like file, I don't know, presentation.zip, right? We have Talkatoo already supports most of this. We haven't finished the plumbing in libpurple for it yet. And by that I mean, I think it's just the protocols we have to do yet. I don't remember exactly. But one of the other things that can be attached are straight images. So Talkatoo itself, if you like click on an image in a web browser and hit copy image, it'll put the image on your clipboard. You can paste that into Pigeon 3 right now, but it doesn't actually send because we don't have all the plumbing done. But so we're getting to that images can just be put directly in chat. You know, that big feature that everybody wants, especially me. As I'm talking to other Pigeon developers all the time, we typically talk on XMPP, and then like I'm either like, hey, look at your phone, because I'll send an image to them to their phone because their phone on XMPP supports image or inline images, or like, hey, look at Discord or Slack or Hangouts or something, right? Like, we need to get that fixed so that we don't have to keep doing that. So that's a real like itch scratching thing there for us, and that's one of the reasons why it's like, all right, we're almost there. We just got to get this thing home, or whatever, you know, to finish it up and bring it home. So aside from that, we've also replaced, I believe, all of our direct socket access with Gsocket. This is a very technical thing, but if any of you out there have ever done network programming with the C-Socket API for BSD sockets or Win sockets, you understand the pain. The amount of preprocessor magic and other stuff that was in our code base to handle this was crazy. Luckily, somewhere around, I want to say it was like glib 2.32 or so, which now I think we depend on glib 2.52 or something. I'd have to double check. They added an abstraction layer for all of this called Gsocket. So like, we don't have to figure out if you're on Windows, and if you're on Windows, then call this other thing, because Windows sockets are completely different, right? That's all just gone. That's all been replaced with Gsocket, which is absolutely amazing. And that's happened recently. But the more important thing is, we used to have this crazy POSIX shim layer for Windows. So POSIX is a set of standards for an operating system. You'll hear something is POSIX compliant. Windows has, even Windows 10, whatever version was the latest, they have a very, very, very bare minimal implementation of POSIX. So like, one of the ways we handled the difference between Unix sockets and WinSock was we implemented a shim layer, a shim POSIX layer on Windows, so that we could do syscalls and IO controls, which is how you do socket stuff on the Linux side, that would then remap it to WinSock and then spit it back out. Since everything's moved to Gsocket, that's all gone. One of the last things we had left there was for like protocols like Bonjour or XMPP, or like anything where you have a peer-to-peer file transfer, we would look at all the network interfaces on your machine so that we can tell the other side where to send the file to, right? So that was one of the last pieces of that Windows POSIX shim. So what we ended up doing was we looked at our dependencies, or we looked to see if there's any libraries that supported that. And we found out that libnice actually does. And one of the cool things about libnice is it's a dependency of one of our dependencies. So we already had it as a dependency, so we just moved our usage, our custom code for it, and pointed it to libnice. So now, instead of us going through and doing manual stuff and mapping between Windows and BSD sockets to figure out what interfaces are on your machine and what their IP addresses are, we now just ask libnice. So that cleans up a bunch more of that code, and that stuff's really cool. We're getting to the point where the custom code paths for Windows are reaching 0. We're not 100% there, and we'll never will get 100% there, but we used to be like, I don't know, 10%, and we're at like 3% now, right? So the Windows version is going to look and act a lot more like the Linux version, which is really good. So aside from that, one of the big things that's different in Pigeon 3 is we have successfully built it and ran it as a native macOS program. So what does that mean? Does it mean we're gunning for Adium? No. So in the past, you can, or even right now, you can run Pigeon 2 on Mac using Xquartz, because Pigeon 2, GTK 2 depends on an X server unless you're on Windows. There's a patch to make it work on Windows or on Mac without Xquartz, but it works. You can get it from Homebrew and it'll work. What this means is one of the big changes in GTK 3 was they made runtime pluggable backends. So, like anybody who's in the Linux world will know that on Windows right now, you've got X11 or Xorg and Wayland. There was also Mir for a while from Ubuntu, or Canonical, I should say. Mir's kind of becoming like a Wayland display manager, but like nobody wanted to have to compile their application for both X and Wayland. So GTK made it so that at runtime, if you're running Wayland, it just loads the Wayland backend. If you're running X, it loads the X backend. Likewise, that's the way the Windows backend now works. Where in the past that was just, static compile time thing. But that also means that somebody went through and built a Quartz backend. So you don't need X Windows at all on macOS anymore because it just speaks the native display protocol, which is Quartz. So one of the things we'll be doing as we're going forward is we're going to make Pigeon 3 look like a native Mac application. It's not going to have the total look and feel because it's still going to be GTK based, but like you're going to have an application menu. The rest of your menu bar is going to be at the top. It's not going to be in the windows. All that stuff's going to work. And our Mac version is going to be a staple, right? So we're going to be releasing Windows, Mac, and Linux versions. We'll have source tarballs for BSD, but that's key. That's huge. All right. So next up, what's next? So, as I mentioned, the next State of the Bird is planned for, right now, tentatively for July 1st. So these are the steps that are going to be taking place between now and July 1st. So the first thing is we've got Summer Code 2021. We haven't participated in Summer Code since 2015. There's been a lot of reasons for that, but the biggest one for me personally has been our code base is a mess, and I'm on record as saying it's hostile to new users. We've improved that situation a lot. I still wouldn't say it's easy for new users, but it's no longer hostile, right? There's sharp edges, but it's a lot better than it used to be. So we applied to be a mentoring organization for Summer Code this year, and we got accepted. If anybody's interested in the Summer Code, I actually have a link I'll drop in chat right now. Application process is open right now. It goes until I think the 17th. I know I have a few questions from some people that I need to answer, and I'm sorry I haven't gotten to them. I've been busy working on this presentation and everything that goes along with this. So that's why, like, you may have heard me say, I'm swamped till Friday. Yeah, that's because everything is going to this right now. But yeah, so Summer Code 2021, we're looking to bring some more people in. Hopefully some people stick around, bring some new energy into the program or into the project and go from there. Our next big thing is we need to continue modularizing GTK-conf.c. And everyone's going, what the heck does that mean? So GTK-conf.c is the main conversation window. And what I mean by that file is the main conversation window, I mean is that file is literally the main conversation window. But it's not just the conversation window, it is every single piece of it. Which means, as we're trying to iteratively update this, and we're trying to do this iteratively because, number one, that's easier to do code review. Number two, we're trying to build composable parts, that kind of stuff. The problem is trying to modularize this thing has been painful. I believe I'm currently on my 9th attempt to do it. And so far I have split out the main window itself, although not all the functionality of it, but enough to bring the menu out. I have split out the buddy icon or the avatar. And that's about it. My next thing is to do the info pane. That's the bar at the top that says like who you're talking to or what chat room you're in, the topic, that kind of stuff. I'm almost done with that. Once those pieces start coming out, then I can start pulling out the chat component, the IM component, and then working on the rest of it. But like right now, if you were to run Pigeon 3, you would see that the conversation window has 2 menu bars. The reason for that is one of them is transitioned to the new GTK API, and the other one is the old deprecated API. And I can't move everything because of the way that everything is intertwined. And if I were to do everything all at once, I'm gonna, well, for comparison, or for example, GTK-conf.c right now, I think 2 months ago or so, it was 10,000 lines of code. It's now down to 8,000 something. And as we start picking and plucking every little pieces out, we're gonna build that file smaller and smaller. But the problem is if we do it all at once, we're going to have a code review that's like 30,000 lines of code. Guess what's going to happen in that code review? Nobody's going to want to look at it. It's going to sit there forever. And once it does eventually emerge, it's going to be full of bugs and stuff that people missed because it was like 30,000 lines of code. So we need to split it up. We need to do it incrementally and so on. But it's a long process and it sucks. And the problem with that is the conversation window is the meat and potatoes of an IM client, right? Like, we want to support stuff like delivery receipts, read receipts, reactions, replies, inline images, all that stuff. We want to support all that stuff, but it's all in this ginormous intertwined file right now, and it is a nightmare to work in it. And that's why this has been my primary focus for a while and why it needs to continue that way. So that's something I hope to have done by July 1st, but won't be surprised if I don't have it done by then. The other problem is finding things you can work on in parallel in it is super duper hard, because then you end up with merge conflicts and it just sucks. So anyways, aside from that, we want to create native installers for Mac OS and Windows as part of our CI/CD. So what that means is, number one, a native installer for Mac OS, that's a DMG file. The typical, download DMG, double click on it, drag the program into applications, full regular normal Mac OS install. Likewise with Windows. With Windows, it's probably going to be an MSI built by Wix. We're kind of leaning away from the null software installer system. A lot of times we get flagged as malware because lots of things use it, and you get false positives, and it sucks, and it's a bad time. Yeah, so we want to get that done as part of our CI/CD so that people can use them, go from there, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, aside from that, the next plan is to finish up the outstanding hosting changes. So as I mentioned earlier, that's moving the email off of Wiktel into our DigitalOcean stuff, and getting Trac off of Steadfast and into the Kubernetes stuff. So that is our plans for the next 3 months. We don't exactly have summer code figured out yet because, again, applications are still open. We haven't accepted any applicants yet. We don't know what projects we're going to be doing yet. So that's kind of up in the air. And that's also one of the reasons why the infrastructure stuff all has to be done by May 1st, because that's going to that needs to resolve before summer code, just so that I'm not trying to balance that with code changes as well as mentoring students. So that's our next steps. So there's one more thing I want to mention before we go. For the adventurous of you out there, you can check out Pigeon 3 right now. We only have an app image, which is unfortunate. I was trying real hard to have both a Mac and a Windows installer by now, but turns out there was like 30 yaks to shave, and I couldn't get it done in time for this. However, the thing to know about these builds are they are development builds. They are not alpha quality. They are not beta quality. They are not meant for end users. As I mentioned earlier right now, the conversation window right now has 2 menu bars. So, and there's a bug right now I've spent a good 6 hours trying to find, and I haven't figured it out yet. But when you're in a chat room, you have to hit the close button n+1 number of times, where n is the number of users in the chat. That's obviously a reference counting bug somewhere. I haven't found it yet. So, but if you want to give it a try, you want to see what's going on, the user interface is real crufty, blah, blah, blah. There's lots of stuff in transition, but you can find it at the link down below. If you just go to our search for its files page, you can get to it too by going to the CI/CD and then Pigeon 3. When we do have Mac and Windows builds, those will be in the same places. So whenever we merge pull request right now and it builds successfully, which hopefully is all of them, but doesn't happen sometimes, it'll automatically be published there. So it's an app image. So right now we just have an app image. Those of you that haven't used an app image before, an app image is kind of like a Flatpak or a Snap, but it predates it. What it does is it takes all of the files, all the dependencies, and it puts them into a single executable, and then it runs it in a virtual file system. So there's no install step. There's none of that. It'll just, you just grab it, you just go. So the Pigeon 3 app image right now is about 163 megs. If you want to try it out, just grab whichever. So the The file name is pigeon3 dash the build number. So whatever the highest number is the most recent build. And then there's a commit hash after that. So you know actually what commit you're running against. But yeah, if you want to give it a try, by all means, feel free. And if you have bugs, please look at the issues that exist beforehand and then report them. And better yet, if you want to fix them, we have a bunch of documentation I need to get cleaned up and linked to. But if you're interested in getting into Pigeon development, check out Pigeon Chat. You'll see there's an article right on the main webpage right now that'll tell you how to get there. Feel free to ping me there or even Discord or whatever. There's a million ways to get a hold of me. And, you know, we can work on getting you set up in a development environment and all that. If you need to install the dependencies, I got lists of that. I don't have them documented well. There's tons of reasons, blah, 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 blah. So that is the state of the bird. So now we're going to get to questions. All right, let's see. So we need to click here. We are going to turn that on. Oop. Okay, that clearing that up. All right, so we only got a few questions here, but let's see. What do we got? First question comes from Lentil Stew Dragon. Asks, what's the relation between Pigeon and Adium? So, oh great. All right, well, I can't fix that now. Clearly I didn't test this part after I put my camera in a box. Actually, wait, why did that happen? Wait, I can fix that. Hold on. Wait. We should be able to do that. Yeah, there we go. Sweet. All right, so Lentil Stew Dragon asks, what's the relation between Pigeon and Adium? So Adium actually started its life as its own completely different instant messaging client. And I don't remember what version, but they added support to be able to use libpurple and therefore libpurple plugins. You can't just use a stock libpurple protocol plugin or libpurple plugin in general. You need to add a little wrapper file around it and then compile it for Mac OS. But so Adium uses libpurple to talk to libpurple based protocol plugins. So like stuff like the Discord plugin and Slack plugins and that kind of stuff. If somebody builds the Adium wrapper for it, you can use those existing plugins in Adium. So yeah, so Adium uses a version of libpurple 2. I don't remember what their last build was with. I want to say it was 2.11 or something, but somewhere around there. So aside from that, because of that, because of Adium using libpurple, that kind of stuff, we obviously all know each other. So we have Adium developers or contributors and stuff on the Instant Messaging Freedom board, that kind of stuff, because we're all kind of intertwined that way. All right. Next up, hopefully that answered your question. If not, ask any follow-ups you got. We'll go from there. All right, next up, we got a question from Protect P99. It says, what are your future plans for Pigeon 3 in the coming 6 months? So hopefully I already answered most of that in the what's going in the next 3 months. The next 6 months is a little trickier, trying to project that far out. But assuming we get all the conversation stuff sorted out and make it so it's actually easily updatable, the next big focus is going to be driving home a lot of the new features that you find in current chat projects or chat programs. That's stuff like delivery receipts. Delivery receipt is like if you ever use like Signal or Telegram, or sometimes even SMS, like it'll tell you when somebody received the message. It doesn't. That's different from a read receipt that tells you when somebody read the message. So there's a lot of protocols that support both of those, and we want to get both of those in. Aside from that, there's stuff like message reactions. You know, like somebody says a message, and then somebody hits a thumbs up emoji on it. Those we want to get into. There's obviously the message attachments that's being inline images or just files, that kind of stuff. And then the whole emoji problem. So that's kind of my goal for July through September, or at least right now, that's where that's falling. But obviously before we can get to that, we have to clean up the conversation window first. And until we get there, we'll see what happens. So, all right, next up, we've got a question from Melina Forever that asks, are you happy with the Meson build system? Did it simplify your building process for macOS, Windows, Linux? Meson is amazing. So I had been using AutoTools since 2002, 2003. AutoTools was never... It was always a pain. I was going to say it was never enjoyable, but no, it wasn't even like tolerable. It was just like every time you have to change something in the build system, you're just, ugh. Like, I don't want to do this kind of thing, right? So I for a long time there, I want to say from like, I don't know, '08 until Meson came out in, what, 2017 or so, I was using CMake. So like all my personal stuff, I moved to CMake. We still kept Pigeon and AutoTools because switching the build system of Pigeon was not an easy process, especially to do in a minor release. That's something that's going to affect a lot of packagers and just cause problems for them and that kind of stuff. It's not the end of the world. Like they can deal with it, but it's not fun, right? So when Meson got announced, QLogic, he's another Pigeon developer, aka Elliot D. I'm going to mess up his last name. We'll just say Elliot. Went through and he started with some of our smaller sub-libraries like gplugin and started moving them to Meson. gplugin was already in CMake, so you didn't have to deal with the AutoTools hell. And that one went pretty well. Then he went through and moved Pigeon, I think. I think we split out libgnt after that. And then he went through and converted Pigeon from AutoTools to Meson. And in doing so, he became a contributor to Meson as well. But the Meson stuff makes things just so super easy. Everything's just easy to understand. There's no magic like, you must have this suffix on your variable name to do things this way. There's none of that, right? It's just everything makes sense. It's there. Now, when it comes to the Windows and Mac OS builds, those are their own kind of special problems. Because neither one of them really work like a Unix system, right? Where like you have a package manager and like you have a prefix where everything goes, right? So on Windows, it's easier to build on Windows with MSys using either the MingWi 32 or 64-bit repositories, but like trying to package a binary out of that is really hard. Likewise on Mac. If anybody has ever tried to build software against Homebrew with that software not being in Homebrew, yeah, you know the pains there. And the problem is you end up having to do like a million different configuration flags to like point the build at the Homebrew installed Python, because Homebrew won't actually link Python into the Homebrew install prefix because Python exists in the official Mac stuff and they don't want to mess it up, which I understand, but it means you end up having like 50 configure arguments. I'm exaggerating, but it's still over like 10. And like trying to get end users to do that sucks. But one of the benefits is so like I mentioned earlier how I was hoping to get CI/CD builds built for macOS and Windows done by today. But I ran into problems there because of stuff like the dependencies. So we tried to do a bunch of work to figure out like how to pull stuff out of Homebrew as well as MSys2, and then be able to package those up into something that we could deploy to end users to have them install. And the problem with that is we have to keep a complete list of all the files we need, which that's not necessarily super hard, but it's error prone, right? So like so we depend on glib, and glib is a sub-library called GIO, and GIO has these module libraries that don't go into user lib. They go into user lib GIO. So now we have to keep track of the list of those files we need on top of that. So if GIO changes any of those files, we're going to have broken builds, right? So that's painful. So then we started looking at, okay, well, what will it take for us to build like a bootstrap of all the libraries at these specific versions? And then we just install them to a prefix and we strip out the stuff we don't want. So worst case, we end up with a package that's a little bit bigger than it needs to be, but everything will work, right? Instead of it missing stuff, we'll have extra stuff. And we started going down that road by using a tool called JHBuild that comes from GNOME. But we ran into a wall when it comes to GStreamer. GStreamer is a library that lets you do basically streaming media. So audio, video, that kind of stuff. It's the way that all of our voice and video stuff is based on, which we're still getting there with voice and video, but yeah. Works on XMPP, kind of. So the issue we ran into there is libvpx from Google, which is your VP8, your VP9 codecs for WebM and WebP. It doesn't have a standard build system. It's not using AutoTools. It's not using CMake. It's not using Meson. It's not using any of that. And JHBuild doesn't know how to build it, and you can't tell it how to do a custom build system. I assume that's because they don't want somebody like exploiting one of the GNOME repositories and like running arbitrary commands. And then anybody that's running something out of JHBuild is then running arbitrary commands and owning their machines. So JHBuild just hard stop. We can't do anything here. So I started picking up a tool I started writing a long time ago. Actually, before getting back to the Meson question, like I was so done with CMake even at one point that I started writing my own build system. And that build system was based on Python. Your actual build file was actually a Python file. Not like generate your project, but like the syntax needed to be Python specific, but it didn't look like Python code. So like when you typed capital P project and you put parameters in, it would do magic in the background and create a project for you. So that was the tool I started called Reap. But then Meson came out and I was like, oh, somebody wrote what I was writing. My job's done. I can just use this now, right? So I picked that tool up that's called Reap, and I reappropriated it to become a JHBuild replacement. But then QLogic was like, I think we might be able to do the full build out of Meson submodule or subprojects. So one of the cool things about Meson is like a lot of people will build subprojects by like adding a submodule to their repository. So like, when you check out the thing, it's like, oh, you got to do git submodules in it, git submodules sync, git submodules update, blah, blah, all that noise, right? Meson takes a more pragmatic approach. What you do is you create a wrap file which says where to download the software, what revision to download, and then how to use it, right? So then what happens is when you're building your project, if you can't find the dependency, you can add a sub-project that says, here's how to build the software, and then that just becomes part of your build. So with us being based on GTK, GTK already has all their sub-projects built so that you can build GTK from scratch, just a C compiler. So if we add the sub-project for GTK as well as GStreamer, we should be able to get around that problem. And one of the other benefits there is that means we will have the same build system across all of our platforms, which is something we don't have in Pigeon 2 right now. And even then, when we build them, everything will be at all the exact same versions. So like if you build Pigeon 2 on a Linux machine right now, you're at whatever version you have on your distro. The Windows stuff is very specific versions because it's what we know works, and updating it is very difficult. So like there might be a bug with one of the libraries we're using in Pigeon 2 on Windows that's been fixed on Linux side, but we can't exactly fix it because updating the Windows dependencies suck. By building everything all together at once, everything will be flat images or flat versions across, or the same versions across, which then means we shouldn't have any of those bugs. So that's a huge thing, huge benefit for us here. So I kind of went way off the rail there, but so yeah, long story short, did it simplify us? Yes, very much so. So sorry, I've got to clean up the queue here a little bit. All right, next up we've got, I wish I could read these a little bit more before just posting them. Is there an interest in GTK4? Yes, very much so. I touched on this a little bit earlier. So GTK4 is obviously going to be the future. But one of the problems we have is we're still using a lot of deprecated API from GTK3, which means until all that API is removed, we can't even consider GTK4 because that API is removed in GTK4. So like we're just not even going to be able to build because we're going to be calling functions that don't exist anymore. Aside from that, GTK4, while it's technically released, it's not actually in a whole lot of Linux distros yet. So like we could provide an app image or a Flatpak or a Snap or, a Windows executable or a Mac executable. But like aside from that, like anybody that wants to compile it, like, so I can install GTK4 from Debian Experimental, and I'm sure it's available on Fedora Rawhide, but like somebody who, like, not to single out anybody in particular, but we'll take somebody who's not as experienced, say they're a student in school, right? And they're going to be a summer code student. If we were to push GTK4 right now, we're either asking them to update their system to Debian Unstable with experimental, which is probably more than they bargained for, or we're asking them to install GTK4 from source, which is also more than they bargained for. So until GTK4 kind of falls into more Linux distros that are actually released, we're probably not going to consider it, but we're definitely still moving that way. So the real question that comes up is, will Pigeon 3 be using GTK3 or GTK4? And the answer is, I don't know. We're still targeting GTK3, but depending on how long it takes us to actually get to the point where we're actually able to release, I would much rather move to GTK4 rather than a library that's already destined to be deprecated in a couple of years, right? So we'll see what happens there. All right, next up, Zombie asks, what about all the external Pigeon modules such as Discord, Skype Web, FChat, Mattermost, Pigeon when Pigeon 3 is released? Will there be a shim for loading Pigeon 2 modules on Pigeon 3? Maybe. There's been so much change between the two that there's going to be code changes. I do have a proof of concept Pigeon 2 or Purple 2/Pigeon 2 plugin loader, but it's very error prone. And the idea is that it'll load a plugin from Purple 2 in Purple 3, but there's so much magic involved in that, messing around with remapping symbols and memory space. It's really painful. The best bet for plugins right now is we do have a library that we call TwoTree that needs to be updated. It's been a while since we've updated it. But the idea is that it creates a header file, or I think right now it's just a header file, but the long-term goal is that it'll be a header file, like a small library you can just statically link to. That'll essentially let you write the Purple 3 API, but the library itself will then remap stuff to the Purple 2 API. So then what'll happen is when you're building for Pigeon 3 is you just don't link against that static library, and then everything just works, right? But this is a major version change. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff have changed. Last time I looked at the churn in Mercurial between 2.x.y and 3.0 branches, it was over 2.5 million lines have changed. And the project's not that big. We're actually only about 350, 400,000 lines of code right now. But what that means is we've changed stuff, and then we changed it again, and we keep changing stuff and that kind of stuff. And so there's lots and lots of churns there, lots and lots of change. So where that's going to end up, unfortunately, the plugins are going to have to update. I've talked to Ian, and I've mentioned that, hey, I'll probably be giving you some pull requests in the near future to update some of your plugins, that kind of stuff, especially with the app image builds out there now. I wanted to get that done before today, but there's only so many hours of the day, and there's lots and lots of yaks that need to be shaved. So unfortunately, none of the third-party plugins have been updated yet, but like I want to get the Slack one doesn't work at all in Pigeon 3. I want to get Discord updated, and I forget what else. But figuring out how to map those directly is going to be problematic. And I know Ian had a lot of work on it before, but we've changed a lot of that stuff since then. We've cleaned up a lot of the interfaces for protocol plugins, stuff like that. There's still some additional cleaning that needs to be done, but things are a lot different than they were a year ago. As we finalize that API, figure out exactly how it's going to work, that kind of stuff. So, all right. Last and final question, unless anybody who wants to ask any other questions. Remember, you can type !ask in chat to ask a question. So we've got, did your change for XMPP mean that Pigeon 3 will display inline images? Use Pigeon 2 with Spectrum 2, and it supports forwarding inline images to XMPP clients. So displaying inline images takes multiple pieces. So again, talking about the way the architecture of Pigeon and libpurple and Finch and all that. So Talkatoo has support to display and accept inline images from the user. And Pigeon 3 and Purple 3 now know how to add attachments to images. The problem is I haven't updated the XMPP plugin in Purple 3 to actually send and receive them yet. So what will that mean for Spectrum 2? Getting back to your last question too about what does this mean for the other stuff, including Spectrum 2, is Spectrum 2 is based on Purple 2. If Spectrum 2 wants to use the new stuff where like you can actually send an attached inline image, it will have to update to Purple 3. It's the same deal as us moving from GTK 2 to GTK 3 to GTK 4, right? Things are going to change. I'd love to keep a compatible API, but we have to make changes. That's the whole point of a major version, is to make breaking changes. So, unfortunately, like, how is Spectrum 2 going to handle that? They're still going to use Purple 2. Like, my changes to the Purple 3 XMPP protocol plugin's not going to affect them until they move to Purple 3. So, yeah. All right. Anybody else have any other questions? Otherwise, I think we're going to call it here. Give you all a few minutes here, or a few seconds. So, just for anybody that's not aware, that's new here tonight that didn't know I had a Twitch channel or anything like that, we typically are... I stream almost all of my pigeon development. I shouldn't say all, but I stream a lot of my pigeon development here on this channel on Twitch. I'll drop my schedule right here for those of you that want to see it. We're only 2 days a week right now. I got to work a third one in. It used to be 3, but then I had something come up on that night, and I got to figure it out and work out from there. But yeah, Thursday nights, again, that's a special night for Pigeon. We always work on Pigeon on Thursday nights. We're actually going to be skipping the night stream tonight, the normal scheduled time tonight, because I don't know if you can hear it, but I'm already starting to lose my voice. And I don't want to stress my voice anymore, because that's going to be bad. So, we'll see. All right, we got one more question come in from... I still don't know how to say your word. Perkin G. Let's go with that. And they ask, is there going to be a launch party? What do you have in mind? The thing is, Pigeon 3's release is still... I'm hoping to get... I would be overjoyed if we had a beta of Pigeon 3 out by the end of the year. Overjoyed. I think this plays more into the bigger topic of when exactly do I expect Pigeon 3 to be released? And the answer is, at the earliest, 2022. Where in 2022? I don't know. And the reason for that is, to get back to Zombie's question about what does this mean for third-party plugins and that kind of stuff. If we release Pigeon 3... LibPurple is a library, right? There's certain rules we have to follow for it when it comes to API and ABI versioning. If we released Pigeon 3.0 today, tomorrow, next week, next month, 6 months from now, whatever, right? That means we can't change or delete any API. I'm not confident in that API yet. So the plan is to get as much done and cleaned up as we can, and then start cutting alphas and betas. And that'll give plugin developers some time, but we're not guaranteeing the API stability yet, right? So, like, for those of you that weren't around before we released Game 1.0, every time Game released, if you developed a plugin, you had to update your plugin because things changed. Things got broken, things got added, things got completely rewritten, and your code just wouldn't compile anymore. Now, we will not be doing that after 3.0 because we have API and ABI stability guarantees to maintain. However, we're not going to find all those issues to get them worked out until we have third-party developers building plugins and stuff like that. So I don't want to throw them under the bus, but I need people to work with me to help us figure out those rough edges so that we can get that figured out so that we can actually just keep moving and keep releasing. But that's where we're getting. So let's see, we got one more question here. Well, we ask, don't get me wrong, but in case you die, the bus factor, it's a real problem. Are all the passwords and so on available for a follow-up person? Is that a concern open source devs are concerned about? Yes, very much so. Very, 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 very much so. One of the reasons why all the Kubernetes manifests are public are so that, number one, people can learn from. Number two, other people have access to them. Number two, we do have a backup in place. That backup right now is Rekanaro, as many of you know from the stream, that kind of stuff. Now, he doesn't necessarily have the time and resources to go through and continue developing the project, but I've known him for a very long time. He's currently the president and the treasurer of Instant Messaging Freedom, and he has access to all the things I have access to. He doesn't have my keys. I still have to figure out I don't even know what you call it. The plan is that I will probably take my keys and encrypt them on a USB key or something and give them to him, and then give the password to the executor of my estate. So that in the event of my untimely death, that key can get pushed over to Rekanaro, who can then unlock my keys and then masquerade as me or sign stuff as me, whatever, right? So like right now, with us just releasing 2.14.2, I have the only valid signing key for the project right now. It's tied to me personally. We do not have an organizational signing key right now, so we need to get that figured out. But so like in the event of my death, the only way we can do releases is with my key, right? Or all releases will be blocked until somebody else gets a key. And getting a key doesn't take super long, but it took 2 weeks for me, right? So like if we have a security issue and we have to release today, how do we do that, right? So if my key's not accessible because of my untimely demise, there needs to be something to make that work. And that's definitely something at least I am very concerned with. I can't speak for other open source projects. Some of these things will be alleviated once we get Instant Messaging Freedom's been a little neglected over the years, just as Pigeon has been as well. Go figure, same people. Once we get our address situated and all that stuff, then we'll go ahead and get an organizational based signing certificate, and then we can have multiple custodians of that, right? So instead of like me just owning my keys right now, we'll have an org key that like I and Rekanaro will both have access to. But like all of our passwords are in a shared password vault on 1Password. Multiple people have access to them. Likewise with all the servers, both Rekanaro and RLogger, you saw him in here earlier. They all have access to all of the infrastructure stuff. I think I've left okay documentation, but I don't know, right? We'll see. At some point we'll have to do a disaster recovery test and see what happens. But we'll go from there. But likewise, like with the hub setup and everything on Kubernetes, I've given Rekanaro a primer on it, that kind of stuff, and you know we can go from there and see what happens. But yeah, it's definitely something, especially with one of the so like I mentioned earlier, Pigeon isn't your typical open source project. It's not like a library for developers. It's not like, oh, big whoop, I'll just fork it and make my own thing. Forking Pigeon, it's not easy. And like trying to we have a very long history, and we have a not as big anymore, but we had a huge fan base. We were very influential, stuff like that. People are going to remember that, and it's just having somebody take over the name and stuff, and like just trying to move everybody to a new name, that sucks, right? So like you've got to figure out your kind of post-mortem plans. But yeah, I don't know. That's my opinion on the matter. I'm trying to make sure we've got our stuff in order, but we'll see where it goes from there. All right, the zombie asks, deprecation of AIM plugin. AIM does still work with Phoenix. That's not what I've heard from you, I thought. Yeah, it's half broken. That doesn't mean it worked. You can't add buddies correctly. You have to add buddies with blah, blah, blah. You have to add buddies via XMPP with Spectrum 2. You can't join chat rooms. You can't transfer files. Okay. The MSN PCAM plugin used to work with escargot until they implemented Windows Live Messenger 2009. Then it broke. Made efforts to fix it and have your repo on GitHub for it. But your question it's too long. I can't even see the rest of it. Yeah, you went over Twitch. You went over Twitch's limit. I can't even see the rest. So what's your question? Like, are we going to support protocols that have been removed by or no longer supported by their upstreams? No. I thought I've been very clear on this, but to be even more clear, no. AIM has been removed from the Pigeon 3 branch. The only reason it's still in the Pigeon 2 branch is because removing it would push 2.15.0. And we're not going to release 2.15.0. We have to do 2.15.0 because we've made a change, right? It's not technically an API change, but it's a big enough change where it should warrant a minor version bump, and we're not going to do that. MSN has been dead for a very long time, and we're just not going to support it. If the third-party protocol server people, MSN, Escargot, Phoenix, whatever, if they want to update the plugins, that's fine. I don't care. If they want to take ownership of it, that's fine. But we're not going to waste our development effort on supporting niche protocols for the sake of retro feelings, right? Like, I personally can't defend working on support for AIM, which is, for all intents and purposes, dead, instead of updating XMPP, instead of adding better integration for Slack, for Discord, for Matrix, right? Why would I ever take away from the things people are actually using for, haha, I'm using AIM in 2021, even though it's been dead for 4 years? Why would I do that? There's no reason for that. Oh yeah, we still support IRC. And we will be adding IRC v3 support. But like there's literally no reason for us to support those niche protocols. Like, if other people want to support it, by all means, that's fine. But like, we kind of went through this a little bit when we dropped our Napster plugin support, because we had a Napster plugin at one point in time. And we, the GUIfications developers at the time, decided to adopt it and pulled it into the Purple plugin pack. But even then, like, Open Napster hasn't been updated since like 2004. So we recently deleted it because what's the point? Nobody's using it. Like, at some point you have to justify the time you put into it, right? And I'm not going to use AIM. The only person I ever see asking about AIM is Zombie, and nobody else. So there's one person out of everybody else that's asking me for support for other modern features. I'm going to go towards the modern features, because at the end of the day, this is a program that's supposed to make people's lives easier, and I don't see how adding support for, or continuing support for a dead protocol helps people. It's like, oh, it's funny. Yeah, it's ironic. We're using a dead protocol in this time, but at the end of the day, barely anybody wants that, right? Like, I understand people want to do that, but it doesn't pan out for us long term. So, all right, we got any more questions, or we're going to call it here? I originally planned about 2 hours for this. Turns out that was a good call, because we're at an hour 56 right now. Alright, so you asked another question here. Zombie ads, that's what I wanted to ask, and then I was going to ask if these other interested third parties want to continue to develop. Yeah, if they want to continue to develop, by all means, that's fine. I mean, they can even pull the code out of the tree, they can keep it as a repository, they can convert it to Git, I don't care. As long as they're following the license, that's perfectly fine. And the beauty of everything being a plugin, all the protocols being a plugin in libpurple, is people can do that, right? I mean, they could fork the plugin today and make it work. And that'd be it. It'd be fine. That's exactly how MSN Pecan started, right? The author wasn't happy with the way things were going in the MSN protocol plugin, so they forked it and started doing their own work. And that's just how it goes. That's what happens. So, alright, next up, Perk and Jerk says, how can anybody support directly the project? What do you mean? Support how? You can just answer in chat. You don't have to ask again. Do you mean financially? Do you mean with code? Do you mean supporting end users? That's a pretty broad question. So if you can specify, we can go from there. All the ways? Okay. So, there is a donate button on Pigeon.im, which, we close this, Pigeon.im. There's a big donate button right here you can hit if you want to support I Am Freedom directly, which will then filter back into Pigeon. You can also support directly me via my Patreon or via a Twitch sub or a donation. There's a donation link here on Twitch too. It's under PayPal. So that's the main ways to do financially. If you're more interested in finding a way to like support, to do like bigger donations or something like that, just reach out to me for email. So like for those of you who don't know, I actually quit my job in March of 2019 to work on Pigeon full time. I was at a spot where I had a sizable amount of savings, where I was like, okay, I can actually work on Pigeon full time for 6 months, and this is something I need to do to try to get the Pigeon, to try to get to get a real big push towards 3.0. So I actually ended up pushing that out to about a year or more, and then through my tax return actually, and a grant from I Am Freedom, I was able to push that through to about December of 2020. And then luckily my former employee, the 100X Group, was willing to donate an additional grant to me. And that's what I'm currently using as funding right now. So right now I am full-time on Pigeon. I know you're probably thinking, well, you don't get enough pushed out to do this, but you got to remember I'm doing all the hosting stuff, all the admin stuff, all the social stuff, all the development stuff, the streaming stuff. All of that cuts into this, right? Admitting summer code, mentoring summer code, all that comes in, right? So am I getting as much time to write as much code as I want to? No. But as we finish up a lot of the hosting stuff, more time's going to be going to development and stuff like that. But so if anybody's interested in providing like larger sums of donations for grants, just reach out to me via email. You can find, or my email address is all over the place, but otherwise it's grim@reaperworld.com. You actually can find any number of ways to contact me over here. Oh, I can't spell social. Via my website, which has links to all my different profiles and stuff. But so if you want to develop Pigeon, there is a new page up, docs.pigeon.im. So if you're looking at Pigeon 3, right? If you're not looking at Pigeon 2, you're looking at Pigeon 3. I'm working on a tool to fix the doc site problem. Again, I'm shaving another yak for a problem that shouldn't exist. But there's pages here for how to use our Mercurial setup, as well as how to actually do a code contribution now. Both of these are valid for Pigeon 2 as well. This is the way we run things now. Oh, and I have to make an update on here about using RB tools on Windows with MSys. But so those are good ways to get developed or to get involved there. Aside from that, there's more links at pigeon.im contributing. The using Mercurial thing needs to point to the other thing. There's always 10 billion things to do. So these are all good ways to do that, but this contributing list has a big list. Okay, so Triage, the issue tracker. Like a lot of our things, our track was pretty neglected for a while. So when we imported everything into UTrack, we had something like 3,000 some odd issues open. I think we've got it down to about 2,000. Every now and then I'll get on a kick and I'll be like, all right, I'm going to try triage 100 issues today, right? I'm like, all right, nope, this is gone. This isn't a valid anymore. This got fixed at this, but I'll actually go through 100 issues and figure out what's going on. Because any little bit helps, right? When you're talking about 2,000 plus open issues, anything that can be cleaned up helps. Aside from that, you can help users on our IRC channel or on our XMPP list or conference room. We don't get a whole lot of users in here, which is one of the other reasons why we recently launched Pigeon Chat. But yeah, our mailing lists are kind of a nightmare right now. Our email, again, didn't keep up with the way that the web was moving. So like our email right now doesn't have DKIM or DMARC set up on it, which means most of our emails go to spam. So if you look at, say, list.pigeon.im, and we go to develop, and we look at our archives, you'll see, you know, we steadily have stuff in here, but like, oh, I announced the state of the bird on whatever day this was. I guess the 26th. Nobody replied. It probably went to everybody's spam folder. In February, I announced that we were prepping for the 2.14.2 release. No replies. Nobody said anything. Probably went to spam. A lot of people will say, yeah, they found my email in spam. We talked about I accidentally nuked the review board database. I didn't have backup. Nobody responded to that in January. And so like our mailing list, once we get everything to DigitalOcean, we're going to be setting up DKIM and DMARC and all that. And that should fix a lot of those problems so that people can actually go there. There is our support mailing list. Actually, our support mailing list should have more people on here. Yeah. I don't look at this one as much as I should. But yeah, so like there's another option there. Facilitating translators. If you are somebody that's well managed and able to work with people that are English as a second language, well, let me know. Because we really need somebody to manage our translations, because we just released 2.14.2 and I didn't update the translations. There's a lot of reasons for that. The main one being, like most of our stuff, it gets neglected because we just don't have the resources for it. But on top of that is I don't know any of our translators. I know like 2 of them. We're translated to 100 languages. I have no idea if somebody's translation is accurate or if they're doing malicious things with it, right? I don't know. I have no idea. And so we're actually going to be moving away from Transifex to kind of fix that problem, because we're going to be forcing everyone to move, which sucks, and I'm sorry. But we need to rebuild trust, and we need to know who our translators are. And right now we don't have that. Aside from that, we're still converting wiki pages from Track over to here into our website. We need to make sure that the third-party plugins list is up to date. The third-party plugins list, for those of you that don't know, before this used to be in Track, and you couldn't filter it, you couldn't search, or you could search via your browser, but we've added some filtering support and stuff like that in here that makes it a bit easier to deal with. Aside from that, come on, go back. Whatever, what else do we have here? Aside from that, just participating in discussions, being here on Twitch streams, as I'm trying to figure out how we're going to build the next pieces and that kind of stuff. I'm trying to do things a little bit better when it comes to like design doc stuff. I forgot to mute that. Where you go? Mute for 1 hour. I'm trying to figure, so like right now I'm working on how we're going to handle mentions. Because mentions are another thing that we need to handle soon. Oh, shit. Thanks, QLogic. Why didn't that work? Oh, that's what I gotta do. Okay. Yeah, there's so like right now I'm trying to get a rough idea of how mentions are going to work in the future. Mentions are like when you like highlight somebody's name. So like if I was going to say something to QLogic here in chat right now and I say, "Hey QLogic, what's up?" Right? That's a mention, right? So like you'll notice in Twitch how like QLogic's name is bolded and it has the @ before it. That's a mention. Lots of and we used to just call this Nick highlighting because that's how it was done in IRC, because that was like our primary chat thing when Pidgin was first created. We didn't do a whole lot of AIM chat rooms, although I think there were some. But like, so you just highlight by the name, but now protocols have support for these, right? You've got the Nick highlighting, you've got the ID highlighting, you've got the keyword highlighting. So like on Matrix, I highlight anytime somebody says Pidgin, libpurple, or XMPP, right? So that I can jump into a discussion if need be. Then you've got stuff like Discord has role mentions where you can be like @admin, right? Or you can say @here, @channel, @everyone, @whatever, right? That's the mention API, and I'm building that out right now so that I can put it in a ticket so that people can discuss it, so we can work from there. But yeah, so there's lots of ways to go, lots of ways to contribute that way. And these are all ways that aren't code. When it comes to code, there's a ton of issues that are open, and we don't really have a timeline for Pidgin 3 exactly, or like milestones or anything, because the problem is we try to come up with these ideas. So like this whole idea of the mention API that I'm working on and designing right now, like I'm not actually going to start writing code. I'm trying to actually like build a design document for it, so maybe somebody else can contribute it. But the problem is like as we start to do that and we actually start implementing it, we're going to find problems. And as we find problems, those problems are going to lead to other things that need to be addressed. And that's where the real problems come from. when it comes to trying to like actually schedule something out. Is just there's the problem of I don't know what I don't know until I know that I don't know it, right? That's just where you end up being, is just like, all right, well, great, here we are. Yeah, like there was a good one we ran into recently, or like the conversation window in general, right? Actually, even the status box at the bottom of the buddy list, I was like, yeah, I'm going to update this widget. This shouldn't be too bad. I started that like 2 years ago. I didn't finish it. And actually, I think I threw away the branch because as I started digging into it, I'm like, oh no. And that's one of the reasons why we now have a new widget called Pigeon Avatar, because all of the logic that was in switching your buddy icon and displaying it and showing it where it is in the status widget was a complete duplication of where buddy icons were shown in the conversation window with code that was 75% the same. So it's like, well, why don't I just delete both of these and replace with one good one? Okay. I didn't realize that was the problem until I started digging into it. And likewise, like, with the conversation window, the info pane, I started that pull request first to replace that and make its own widget. But as I started doing that, I was like, all right, well, there's so much logic in the avatar. I really need to pull that out and do that first. So I had 2 commits in my branch. The second one was creating the avatar. I then rebased that onto default and then did that as a pull request and then updated, rebased the other one to then go from there. And it sucks. But this is what happens when you have tech debt and stuff, right? So like trying to schedule out like features for people to add, it's really hard. And for people that aren't intimately aware of the code base, it's difficult. This is why, like I've said, our code base in the past was hostile to users. Now it has some sharp edges. Like, it's no longer trying to actively hurt you, but if you're not careful, it will hurt you, kind of things. And I'm not trying to say that shouldn't be a reason why somebody doesn't apply for summer code or something, but I want to be upfront so that people don't come into summer code and then be like, or to come in to contribute at all, actually, right? And then be like, oh my God, this is way more involved and way harder than I thought it was. Like, I want to be upfront that this is not going to be easy. And we're getting there. We're trying to make things easier, but we're not there yet. We're just not there. So like, I've been working on Pigeon since 2003. QLogic's been on Pigeon, I think, since 2007. And right now we're the 2 primaries. There's another contributor who's been working actively. He's got 2 years or so. I don't remember when Corky first started contributing to the project. But they're doing mostly cleanup stuff. So simple stuff like in the past, we used to just iterate the glist data structure by calling with for loop. But there's actually been a function the entire time called glist for each, which makes the code easier to understand because then you don't have you have a separate function that does what the iteration is, and then your code that calls it is much cleaner because now you're just calling one function that's going to go do your iteration rather than having that nested inside of the rest of your code, which makes your complexity go up and it's harder to read. So Corky's been doing a lot of that kind of cleanup stuff, which is awesome because it makes the code base easier to understand. But like, they're doing it that way so that they can learn the code base and not actually have to understand how every single piece fits together. Which I can honestly say I don't understand how every piece comes together. Right? Pigeon's a huge project. It's very complicated. I know how most of it comes together and works, but there was something recently that I looked at. Oh, it's how privacy works in the conversation window right now. Yeah, I want to throw all that code out and just write a new version, because the version from there, number one, the privacy stuff is tied to the conversation window. It shouldn't be that way. There should be something like the protocols know the privacy, and there should be something maintaining that rather than doing it just in the conversation. So like the conversation would go, hey, should I ignore this person? And then this guy should make the decision, right? Because this could look at aliases, this could look at contacts, this could look at any number of things, and then they can respond back. But right now, all that logic is in the conversation window. Or it's not in the UI conversation window, but it's in the conversation code in libpurple. And that just shouldn't be there. So it's like when you want to go look for the privacy stuff, you're like, where is it? Oh, it's in the conversation window. It's not in privacy.h and c, where it probably should be. So yeah. All right, so that should take care of that. Survival, if you have a question, please type ask or exclamation point ask, and then we can answer it on stream directly. Somebody asked, is there anyone working on Microsoft Teams plugin for Pigeon? No. Ian and I looked at it when they announced the free tiers. Ian said it looked a lot like Skype, but Ian does not have the bandwidth to work on anything right now, and I'm busy on other stuff. If somebody else is interested in doing it, we can probably figure something out, but it won't be coming from us. Oh, that kind of reminds me of another... we'll mention it here, but this should have been part of the other presentation, or as the main presentation. But going forward, there's some changes that need to happen, but before this happens. But the Pigeon main repository in the future will no longer have any protocols that are proprietary or not open specification. And you're probably going, well, what the hell? The reason for that is we've actually lost contributors because their employers did not want them working on Pigeon due to the legal gray area that some of our code falls into. So even though all of our code is technically fine because it's we haven't reverse engineered binaries, we haven't broken copyrights, all of our code has come from either implementation of open source libraries or by reverse engineering network data. And those are fine. There's no copyright problem there because you can't copyright your a network packet. But we've lost contributors because of it, because as they were working at that employer, they obviously couldn't work on Pigeon because their legal department said they couldn't. And then obviously they filled up that time that they were contributing on Pigeon with something else. So when either they switched jobs or that requirement was no longer a thing, they have something else to bide their time, and therefore they're not working on Pigeon. So to completely make that problem go away, at some point, the Pigeon 3 codebase, we will be taking all of the proprietary protocol plugins, which right now are mostly Meanwhile. What are the other ones? I can't even think of it. Most of the time, I don't bother looking at the protocols because I don't need to, right? They're just all set up. So that means the Facebook protocol plugin, Gadu, Novell, same time will all be moved out to separate repositories. Now, we might pull them in through a Meson subprojects. That might be a quick, easy way to do it right now. But at some point, and I'd love to see it happen this year, and it is on the list of potential summer code projects, is we need a plugin website. And that plugin website would work like an app store. So there'd be a web interface, and then there'd also be a piece built into Pigeon and Finch that would, say, oh, hey, you have plugins to update. Hit this button to update them, and, let you install plugins from the interface and stuff like that. And then there's a summer code project that one of the potential students was here earlier, is looking at applying for it, is a wizard or an assistant for setting up accounts. And one of the things I want to do is when the plugin store exists, plugin website or add-on website, whatever you want to call it, when that thing exists, is like, all right, so one of the things in the account creation wizard is create a protocol, or, select the protocol you want to use. Most people don't know what a protocol is, right? And if they don't see what they're looking for, they're just going to go away. But if we have an API, a REST API that we can say, oh, hey, there's these other protocol plugins, we could then, as part of that assistant, then look up that page to say, hey, not seeing what you're looking for, there's other protocols that are supported via plugins. How about this list, right? And then we can start actually doing cool, fun things like that that'll actually help people out, and we can go from there. So, yeah. All right, survival, since you're not typing asks, for me to get the question in here, I'm going to have to do it. All right, so next up, this question is actually from Survival, even though it says my name. The question is, have you talked about getting accepted into GSOC 2021? We have a bit. We haven't done a whole lot yet because we're still in the application process for students. So one of the reasons, as I mentioned earlier, that we haven't been accepted. So one of the things is the organizations have to apply for it. And we applied in 2016, but we were rejected on a goof up. Let's just go with that. But I was of the stance that I didn't want to bring new students in since 2016 because of the state of the project. I've been pretty upfront about that, actually, saying that our code base has been, not that it's malicious, but like it's not pleasant to work with. But we've been doing a lot of work to make it better. And at this point for Summer Code in 2021, it was like, all right, I think we're at a state where it's not great. It's not where I want it to be, but it's a lot better than it was. So I think we can work with students to get them through this kind of thing. One of the big things is AutoTools is gone. So like teaching a student that's probably never worked with a build system before how AutoTools works. Yeah, that's huge. Mason, on the other hand, much easier to deal with. So that there's that part of it where that makes things much easier. So yeah. So I'm hoping we get some good applications out of Summer Code. We get a lot of good work done. We'll see what happens. Last I checked, nobody had applied yet, but applications just opened on the 27th, so not a huge deal. But I think applications close the 17th or the 19th. I don't know. I got to look. As I've mentioned, all my focus for the past month has been on this date of the state of the bird. So I'm going to be picking up a lot of that stuff that's been kind of ignored since then. But we'll go from there. April 13th. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we've got about 2 weeks, give or take. So expect me to be more active in that stuff, answering questions, that kind of stuff, and we'll go from there. So, yeah. All right, so unless there's any other questions, we're going to get going.